So let me just introduce my guest for the morning. I have in the studio Nana Atobra Kweku. He is the head for research at the Dankwa Institute. And thanks for joining me, Nana. And we have Atik Mohammed, and he is a development policy analyst.
Good morning.
Okay, he's also with the PNC as well. A very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Okay, so let's start with the president. The president has been visiting a number of places these few days or these few weeks. And just yesterday, he was at a factory, a garment factory actually, that manufactured local clothing and garments. And, well, the caption on the front page of the Daily Express is that the president is saying the private sector needs to be innovative. And we know that we've always started the private sector as the engine of growth, etc. And Mohammed, I have to start with you.
Thank you, Roland. Let me say good morning to our cherished viewers. It is true that in recent times, the mantra has been the private sector is supposed to be the engine of growth.
It's supposed to be, it is.
Whatever that means. Because, you see, for me, I've always made the point that it is important to have the private sector participate in national development. But you cannot have the private sector doing it all by itself. Because let's not forget that the business of government is to ensure that it provides that which is necessary for the welfare of the citizenry to be enhanced. And if you leave that to the determination of market forces, because the private sector operates largely by how market forces operate. So if you leave that to the private sector, for them, and we all understand how the private sector operates, it is mostly driven by profit motives. So what they do is that they will do everything necessary to maximize profit. And at the end of the day, most of the time, what that means is that it is not their concern how the general citizenry fare. That is the business of government. And that's why I've always made the point that it should be a partnership between the private sector and government. It is in that respect that I find the call by the president a little interesting, because we all concede that the cost of doing business in this country has gone unimaginably high, all because of that which government has or has been unable to do. Look, the cost of energy, which is a very serious factor input in production, has gone very high. You also have a situation whereby the exchange rate, look, a lot of the intermediate goods that these companies purchase, they are, import purchases. I mean, these purchases are import purchases. And import purchases are not purchases you do with your local currency, especially so that our currency is not convertible, or at least is convertible in principle within the West African Monetary Zone. But beyond which, if you even go to Nigeria, you can't use it, even though in principle it's supposed to be convertible there. But the truth of the matter is that we use other intermediate currencies to do our transactions. Now, your currency has lost value over those major currencies. What that means is that the cost of purchasing a unit of dollar has gone high. And if I go to buy very expensive dollars to go and buy my intermediate goods, when I come home, how do you think my production is going to, respond to those increases in the costs of the dollar and so on? It means that the cost of production is going to go high. So the private sector may be innovative or may be asked to be innovative. But what is government doing to make it possible for them to? For them, they are not asking so much from government. All they are asking government to do is to just create an enabling environment for them to operate. I'm sure if you are a business worth your salt, what you would realize is that at some point, you would have to be necessarily innovative to proceed. So this call is a call that the private sector is already aware of. But all they're asking for is for government to make it possible for them to continue to be in business. It is only when you continue being in business that the questions of innovation, improvement in technology and so on will become material. But if you're out of business, this become immaterial. And my plea to the president and by extension to the government is that make the cost of doing business low. The cost of credit. I mean, if you look at the business environment, it's extremely hostile to the private sector. In as much as, like I said, government has to have a partnership role in this business of growing our companies and so on, or generally in producing goods in this country. But government, beyond that role it has to play, needs to also make sure that the private sector, it keeps on calling upon. They have that
the conducive
environment to operate. If the environment
that the variables within the economy are
killing them.
Are favorable enough for them to.
If the president is making this call, he should back that call with his own by fulfilling, you know, his own responsibility, and by extension the responsibility of government. Make sure that the environment
but Nana Ato-Braah, you would concede that government has put in place perhaps some number of measures. For example, we have a number of funding schemes available. We just even saw the inauguration of a YES fund, so to speak, and all these are supposed to cushion the private sector and entrepreneurs in a way that would enable them to have access to some level of capital and also provide the needed cost for undertaking some businesses in the country. Now, if we come to the point where the private sector would have to be a lot more innovative, is it not also because there are issues of packaging, the quality of the things that come out as far as produce, etc., that perhaps the president may be referring to?
Well, good morning to your viewers and your listeners. Coming from where I take, left off, they say it always takes two to tango. So there's an expectation of how we want the private sector or entrepreneurs to deal with business. Likewise, there is an expectation of the role of government so far as creating the enabling environment, for business to flourish. And I think the ball starts with the government. It ought to create the conducive environment for businessmen to flourish. You referred to the YES initiative. It was launched with some 10 million CD.
I said one of them.
One of them.
We have a
and
number of them.
There have been several of them. But our history, if we go back in recent past, shows us that all those avenues have become avenues for politicians and appointees, bastardized institutions and funds. And so then we have to come and waste.
Allegedly,
but we have to come and waste more money trying to investigate. And when we investigate, nothing happens to the outcomes of those investigations. And government in itself seems to be crowding out the private sector when it comes to accessing finance or funding for business. Because what is the rate of a treasury bill today? So everybody...
It depends on which of them you're talking about. We have 25 for the 91.
Exactly.
22
look at
for the
look at the 90-day, look at the 180-day, look at the 1-year note, all of them. But then, so everybody wants to go there because there's more reward in going there. And so government is competing with the same private sector. It is telling to be innovative. Now, look at our ports. Look at the cumbersome processes you have to go through if you import. And today the price of something is A, tomorrow is A plus 1, because the dollar is not stable. And so there are so many things that ought to be done before you tell the private sector to be innovative. Otherwise, it will always try to maximize, make sure it cuts its costs and makes its profit. I'm in business for profit. You are in business for profit. A station like Multi TV or Joy FM, I can understand your inputs. Look at petrol. Look at diesel. How much does it cost? And you look at telecom. You
just
have
like
to,
many other businesses.
Exactly. So it's not easy to tell somebody just be innovative. It's so easy. Be innovative, but then it comes at a cost. And government must be seen to be acting and be doing its responsibility.
How crucially the volatility as we're experiencing with the CD against the major international currencies at the heart or the bane of the difficulties that companies in the private sector are facing. Now, I take your mind back from 2005, 2006, we had a number of private sector agencies or companies that were operating because we had AGWA. They needed to take an opportunity. Horticulture was rife. They had moved from the Smooth Cayenne to MD2, etc. So you could see that the business environment was growing. You saw a lot more resurgence of financial companies, so to speak. They call them, is it microfinance institutions, etc. And they made credit available. How has the current state of the CD's depreciation at the heart of the difficulties that we're witnessing?
You see, what happens is that if you're a business, if your currency depreciates, what it means is that it increases the cost of your inputs. And when that happens, most of the time, it has a bearing on your profit margins. In the sense that if, for instance, the cost of producing this newspaper is, say, 1 CD, with all things being equal, if the production cost was, say, 1 CD, with the Ghana cedi trading at say 2 cedis to the dollar. Now that it has moved from 2 cedis to say 4 cedis, it means that the cost of producing this invariably is going to go up. And when that happens, and look, profit is determined by the cost of your input and how much price you are placing on the product you have produced. Now, if the cost of production has gone up to say 2 cedis, how much price are you going to possibly place on this newspaper? It might be say 1 cedi, 20 pesos, because you are also considering the consumer interest and how consumer reaction or response is going to be.
But you're also considering your markup too.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, if you overprice your product, it becomes uncompetitive. So you are looking at the response of consumer, and look, consumers, they say always behave rationally. They try to look at how much, I mean, of course, that is why we run a free market economy in this country. If I come and your product is expensive more than product B, I certainly would go for product B. The demand for it is going to go higher than yours. So people are always very mindful of how consumers are going to respond. So when you are pricing, you consider all these things. And if at the end of the day, you are forced to have a higher price, not by your own doing or by the fact that you just want to maximize profit, but by the fact that the cost of input is simply just so high, it is going to affect your profit margins. It is going, because your sales are going to dwindle and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, whoever comes for finance from, say, any financial intermediary, if you go there for funding, and at the end of the day, you are unable to sell as much as you should, your profit is not as much as you expect or you projected, certainly it's going to affect your ability to repay. And that is why you have a lot of people, you know, their businesses are collapsing. Some are always in difficulty with microfinance institutions. And the microfinance institutions themselves are collapsing because, look, just like banks, they work with deposits. You come for loan, the money, your repayment is what they use as capital to give to others and continue to be in business. So, you know, business A takes, business B takes, and none of them is able to pay. You have virtually grounded that microfinance. And in any case, their startup capital is not as huge as ordinary or conventional banks. So they easily get drowned by the inability of businesses to pay. And it's not the fault of businesses. It is just that the economic environment within which they operate is
making it impossible for them to.
It's unfriendly. So you may have multiple financing schemes in operation. Insofar as the cost of doing business, insofar as the business environment does not make it possible for businesses to flourish. Look, try hard as you may, you still cannot make any sense of the funding you get. And look, the Compact 2 that we have gone for, I had the privilege of being in some of the consultations.
What Compact? You mean the MCC?
The MCC Compact 2 that we have gone for. You see, a study was commissioned, and the study was to find out what binding constraints affect businesses in this country. And the conclusion that was reached was that there are two major binding constraints against the success of businesses in this country. And they are the cost of energy and access to credit. That is why, if you realize, a greater percentage of the money that is coming is to be committed into the building of energy infrastructure, so that we can have more accessible and predictable energy supply. So the cost of, access to credit has always been a problem. Now, instead of this administration to work hard to ensure that businesses have easier access to credit, like Atubra was saying, now there is what we call the crowding out effect. Government is competing with private sector for credit. And when that happens, the cost of credit automatically goes up. Because government, if you compare the surety between government and business, the risks involved in giving credit to businesses are higher than giving it. Look, government, cocoa is there, oil is at the end of the day.
And you always have an assurance because it's a sovereign state.
They will pay you at the end of the day. Banks themselves now, let me just end on this point. Banks themselves now, you know that, banks in their operations often devote some specific amount to loans. Now, you know what they have done? It is more profitable to go and buy government securities than to give it to private sector. And even so they themselves are going to buy, they use their money to go and buy government securities. So they themselves, they're trading. And it makes business sense to do that.
Oh, definitely. It does make business sense. But in an environment where we're told, not only by government-exposed people, but also those who tend to manage, well, if it's fiscal policy as well as monetary policy, that perhaps business confidence is being dampened. by the utterances from personalities not only like Atik and like Nana, Tobra, Kweku, etc., but also because these tend to ultimately affect the way people tend to perceive the country and the way the economy is doing. Do you think that all these institutions are not trying to empathize and acknowledge what the reality is? I'm asking this because the Bank of Ghana, if you go to its website, states the exchange rate to be 3.1, okay, but on the market it's far in excess. Just yesterday, a friend of mine wasn't getting enough dollars, so got some around 4 Ghana cedis per dollar. So you can just imagine the way it is.
Disparity.
What the realities on the markets are affecting the way the business is done in reality also.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, like Bawumia said in a statement or a speech he delivered at one of those functions, said if you try to govern with propaganda, the exchange rate is going to expose you. And so that's what we are seeing. The Bank of Ghana does not trade in dollars. And so it's difficult for me to understand why the Bank of Ghana will be quoting figures for exchange rate, you know, suggesting that this is what it's supposed to be.
Is it not logical because the Bank of Ghana is the main supervisor for all the, best commercial banks, all the commercial
banks? It is a supervisor, but it doesn't trade in currency. It's the commercial banks that trade in currency. What the Bank of Ghana normally does is report averages. And so a very simple, you know, gathering of figures from the various banks and averaging will tell you that anything from 3.6 to 4.0 will certainly not give you a 3.0 or 3.1. And so that's not the reality. The reality is that when you go to the market, indeed, so is it possible for me to walk to the Bank of Ghana and demand for dollar at that rate? I wouldn't get it. It doesn't sell it. It doesn't have it. So it can't be quoting prices that it can't offer. If I want dollar, I have to go to the Forex Bureau, the black market, or the banks. And they tell me how much it costs. And so the realities are what we see in the market. In Ghana today, how much is interest? At what cost do we borrow? 27%, 30%, and even these microfinances that you're talking about, some charge as much as 8% a month. What is 8 times 12 for a year? People charge 108% for a year. How can you be competitive in such an environment? In Nigeria, just across the border, interest is around 6%. And so we are not competitive by our structure. If somebody borrows money from there and comes to business here, he is overly advantageous over the Ghanaians. And so all these foreigners trooping in here, we say, oh, this is a good place for peace and all of that. And they come in, they make the money, and they go away. Why are our own guys not competitive? Because the cost of credit is woefully expensive. You get me? So the realities are what we have to deal with. Atik says, and everybody knows, that power is fundamental to production.
They're talking about energy.
Energy is fundamental to production. Now, what is the cost of power in Ghana? Is it even reliable? Is it affordable? They are not. We are hearing that Atuabo gas plant is coming off stream. Between you and I, and those who care to know, Atuabo gas is not going to remedy any situation. We are getting about 120 million, or expecting about 120 million standard cubic feet from Nigeria, the West African gas pipeline. We are not getting that. What Atuabo is going to give us, even added to the Nigerian one, will not be sufficient for us. So Nigerian one being absent and Atuabo coming on stream is not going to help any matter. We are still going to be in this load shedding. I understand yesterday someone from VRA saying that load shedding is coming to an end. It's not true. It's not going to end. And so businesses are going to continue to suffer unless these are addressed. And so when we play politics, or we play propaganda with all of these things, we're not facing realities. And so when people make comments that tend to suggest the rates on the ground, then you begin, some people begin to tell us that, oh, these are the ones that are making people lose confidence in the market. No, the ones making people lose confidence in the market are the ones not telling us the truth. Tell us the truth. Let us face it squarely and deal with it squarely.
Roland, just to add something to this, I think that I am particularly disappointed in the conduct of the Bank of Ghana. As a central bank, you see, look, prior to Ghana's admission of the structural adjustment program and the economic recovery program, we were running what we call the fixed exchange rate regime, whereby the central bank would set the exchange rate for the various currencies that are considered to be trading. I mean, major currencies that we trade in and so on. But after the implementation of those programs, we adopted, or in fact, it was actually a precondition that we should accept what we call the flexible exchange rate regime, which means that exchange rates are to be determined by market forces. Demand and supply will determine how much a dollar or a euro should sell for. Now, that is what, and the central bank was taken away, or was taken out of the equation of determining what exchange rates we should have in respect of the various currencies. All that it does is that it supervises what happens, and in extreme situations, if there is a decline in the supply of forex, if the central bank has it, it then sells to the commercial banks. Now, if you look at the interbank exchange rate, look, the interbank exchange rate market is something that most of the time we even say the exchange rates are a little on the low and so on and so forth, because they try very hard not to have very huge spreads amongst them, in the sense that if this one's offer price is say 2 cedis and the bid price is 1.9, it makes sense. So the other bank would not want to doesn't want to have a spread which is much higher than that of bank B and so on and so forth. So sometimes we even complain that the exchange rates amongst the banks, are sometimes on the low. But today, as we speak, interbank exchange rate is hovering around 3.7, 3.8. So how on earth can the exchange rate for the dollar, even amongst the interbank, within or amongst the banks, be between 3.7 and 3.8, and Bank of Ghana goes to quote 3.1? What that means is that you are distorting economic variables, and that can be very disastrous. It affects your planning. It affects almost everything you do.
Is it even deceptive to the international investor who would want to come into and logically will first go to the website of the Bank of Ghana to see what the average
is? That is the point I'm making. So it distorts planning. It also gives false economic data, which can be very disastrous. Look, IMF and co, everybody else doing economic computation uses, if it comes to exchange rates, they all go to the Bank of Ghana to get those rates. Now, if the Bank of Ghana is churning out falsified data, it means that everything you use that data to do is going to end up wrongly. And it is going to affect the economic plan, it's going to affect almost everything. And that is why I am particularly alarmed by this. The most important thing for us to do going forward is for us to tell ourselves the truth. That, look, these are the realistic exchange rates on the market. Report them as they are. Let people or individuals make their various decisions based on the true data you have put out. But do not pretend that you want to paint a very good picture about how our currency is faring by beating down the true rate and giving people false impressions. At the end of the day, they plan based on your false data, and they might end up in trouble. And look, IMF, I'm sure if we have the chance, we might discuss it. IMF is coming into town. They work with data that the Bank of Ghana produces. Now, the data you have produced, by all accounts, is faulty. If the data you have produced is faulty, how do you think the IMF is going to relate to you? How do you think the IMF is going to relate to this country? Because they would then think that every piece of data that is produced is having issues or is not accurate. So they may have issues going forward. And the IMF, they do what we call the exchange surveillance. And that is why I heard Kweku Kwarteng complaining about the fact that this is an illegality.
Parliament
for Boase West also. Complain that this is an illegality. It's an illegality in the sense that if you look at the IMF articles that we all have gone to ratify, Article 4 talks about, it mandates IMF to do what we call exchange surveillance. To come and monitor your exchange rate regime, whether you are falsifying data as Bank of Ghana is doing, or you are trying to set exchange rates, you are not allowing the market to determine exchange rates and so on and so forth, which in the long view hurt global economy. And this is what central bank is doing. At the end of the day, I strongly feel that it is a breach of that particular Article 4, and if we don't take care, we might not be very excited people when the IMF finishes with whatever they come here to do.